So I'm going to try to keep this one pretty contained as well. I'm going to look at a bit more of a advanced topic, one might say. It's the way that our currency works. So a lot of people don't quite realize what the point of our currency is. We think of taxes as the government paying for something. The government isn't paying for things with taxes, it's already paid for them. And that's the point of contention. You see, Canada uses what's called fiat currency. Fiat means it doesn't have any inherent value. It's not backed by something. So whilst historically we used the gold standard, the gold-backed currencies of the past, that's not exactly great for the situation that we find ourselves in right now. See, gold-backed is great if you are a prosperous nation that can produce a lot of physical goods. You can trade those goods for gold, and you can fill your treasury. And then you use that gold to essentially say, hey, this currency is worth something. Each dollar is equal to a set value of gold. Now, that doesn't work well if you have very abstract programs and planning. So, for example, if you're going to build a castle, you can figure out what the cost of that is pretty quickly. But if you're building, say, a healthcare system, how do you manage the costs associated with that? You have to go and use your gold to pay for it year on, and gold is fundamentally a finite resource. Meaning, you drain through your treasury, and you have to tax to get that gold back. Now, I bring up the example of healthcare for a specific reason here, as it was healthcare and the pension system that forced us to move towards fiat currency. So it's the same thing that happened in the United States in the 30s and 40s. For us, it was the 50s. We set in place a bunch of social programs that are very expensive. For the United States, it was Social Security, and for Canada, it was the CPP and our public health care. What these ended up doing was they drained out our treasury very quickly. We had to raise taxes a lot to pay for it, and we couldn't print as much currency because each dollar ended up being worth less than it was before. It caused a massive level of inflation in the cost of goods because you only had so much gold to pay for things. So what we did is we switched over towards fiat currency. Fiat currency allowed them to print as much money as they needed to pay for those programs, and then control the inflation that's produced year on by taxing 98% of that currency so that it's pulled out of circulation. And that's an important thing to realize with your tax system. It's not about paying for programs, rather it is to pull currency out of the system so that we avoid massive inflation. This is because our currency is literally made up. Now, this has become a problem in the last few years with inflation because of a handful of factors. The first is that we spend way too much to actually get back out of the economy. And the reason for this is because you have a parabola of gains, essentially. You take a parabola, you cut it in half, and there you have your curve chart, where we are starting to reach that upper edge of what we can actually get in terms of gains with our current tax system. So to get more, we'd have to completely overhaul how we handle our taxes, and that's just not going to work. That's what we'd have to do to pay for our systems as it stands. The other way that we are trying to deal with this is through increasing our GDP. Now, gross domestic product gives you a general idea of how much tax revenue you can bring back. And with that, they can go and control for the amount of inflation they have. If you have the ability to tax people's transactions, their income, and their properties up to 98% of the currency you printed, say you print $1 trillion and you get 980 billion of it back, well, you're getting that 2% inflation mark that you want. But which is a very big one, the issue rises when you have a mismatch between your growth and your spending. So the reason why we have this 2% inflation target is because our economy normally grows at around 2% year on. That's generally how it's been, and that's kind of matched with our population. Population and economy grow at roughly the same rate usually, so by upsetting this balance, we've kind of screwed ourselves with how we manage our currency. For example, right now we have 10% year-on population growth thanks to our massive immigration push. That's upsetting our economy, which is only having a 2.4% growth year-on. The problem with that is it means that 2.4% growth, that creates a few million or a few thousand jobs, sure, but that's not the same number that you need to fit all those migrants. So now all those migrants are dependent on the government to keep them clothed and fed and happy and stop them from revolting. What do you do then? Well, you have to print more money, meaning you need more migrants to increase your GDP, to pull more currency out of the system because you increased your tax, or you increased the amount of currency you pumped into the economy, and now you have to get 98% of it back. Well, now you're in a self-feeding cycle, and that's what we've fallen into. That's why mass immigration is so bad for Canada. We don't have the economic growth to sustain it. And incidentally, this is also showing the biggest weakness of fiat currencies, where now we've realized, and we don't want to admit it, but these social programs that we put in place, we cannot pay for them. There is no way to pay for them. It is impossible to maintain the CPP with how populations grow and how our system operates. So that's why we see the pensions plan, the rate or the age that people can retire being pushed back. I think what's going to end up happening is that the CPP is going to end up getting pushed back to all the way to 70. And what are we going to have then? We're going to have 70-year-olds retiring. Well, the men that are on the workforce are just going to die at work because the average age of death is still in like the 70s for men. And you're going to get a lot of old women that are pensioners. Well, whatever. That's fine. The problem is that by the time we reach that point, we're going to have a generation of people who are going to look at that and say, okay, there's no point to the CPP. I'm just going to have my own private pension. And I think we're going to naturally see a move away from the CPP towards private pension funds, kind of like the 401ks in the United States. And you're going to see a lot more young people looking at it and saying, you know what, I'd rather put that $50 towards a retirement fund for myself every paycheck than put it in towards the CPP. Because what are they going to get out of the CPP in 10 years? Nothing. What are they going to get when they're 70? Nothing. Because it won't exist anymore by the time that people my age are in their 70s. Because we have no way to pay for it with our current system and our current growth. Because when I'm in my 70s, guess what's going to happen? There's going to be 50% more people taking from it than there are now. Because that's just how population growth works. And it's the same thing with our healthcare system. The biggest users of our healthcare system are young mothers and the elderly. Now, young mothers, it's because they're bringing their kids for dubious reasons. The elderly, it's because they legitimately need that care. Now, our healthcare system is a lot more affordable if we cut out the fat and change up how we manage that system. However, that's something for me to talk about another time. And it's not something for the federal government to oversee, in my opinion. It's something that needs to be managed by the provinces. Anyways, I think what we need is a shift with how we manage currency. So we need to reduce the amount of printing that we have going on, and we need to encourage economic growth. We need to have that year-on 2% inflation rate, because anything less, our currency becomes unreliable. Anything more, our currency becomes unsustainable. And as a result, we kind of need to just manage that 2%. We can lower taxes, though, if we reduce the amount of spending we have. And if we lower taxes, we'll also increase our economic growth, meaning we end up in a self-feeding cycle of growth. The more growth we have, the more revenue we have, meaning we pull more currency out of the system every time. Meaning we have a wider berth to go and sit there and look at our inflation rates. This will also cause a drop in the price of goods, because with our economic growth, it means we have more jobs, we have more production going on. Meaning those goods, the individual people in the economy have more purchasing power. So it doesn't matter if the currency is actually worth more or not, because those goods will drop in price. So our currency will still end up being worth whatever, 87 cents to the United States dollar. I think that's what it was when I was a kid. Might go back to that, probably hang around 80, let's be honest. But the goods that you'll be able to purchase with those 87 cents will be greater than before. And that should be our target, in my opinion. And this is an opinion that I hold that's different from Maxime. Maxime wants a 0% inflation rate. I think that would be absolutely disastrous, based off of my own research and knowledge of the economic history. We really should be looking at trying to maximize our economic growth and minimize our population growth for those next few years, so we can equalize these things out, and hopefully in that same time build up industry so we can start producing things locally, and that will increase the general buying power while also increasing the price of some goods, but also increasing the quality of those goods. And when the quality goes up, that means everybody's happier. It also means more jobs, which means fewer people that are unhappy. And you're also going to see a massive boom in the middle class and the working class, where people aren't going to be forced into these crappy service jobs. Everybody knows how demeaning it is to work in retail. And you'll have young people who can go right out of high school into careers. So you're going to have a lot fewer people who are entering into the university system faced with a meaningless future of essentially bureaucracy, working in some kind of office, and instead they'll have some kind of productive, meaningful work. You'll see a massive decrease in the amount of revolutionaries we have, and a massive uptick in the amount of people who are actually happy. Perhaps we can even move off our resource economy and towards an industrial economy like we had back in the 50s and 60s, where we actually could still pay for these things. But to get that, we also need to change how we handle free trade. So we need to rework the USMCA. And that's not something that the big parties will do. The big parties benefit too much from free trade because free trade reduces the wages of people. It also reduces the cost of goods, meaning they can just go and buy all sorts of cheap crap for really cheap. Or they can get their nice goods for really cheap. It's how we get the iPhone for less than $2,000. If it was produced in the United States or in Canada, it'd cost $2,000. But you can get it for $879 because it's produced using borderline slave labor on the other side of the world. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that use of slave labor is absolutely immoral. And it's one of the biggest reasons why free trade needs to be done away with internationally, and we need to switch back to the mercantile system that we had up until the 1980s. Mercantile system that made us one of the most powerful economies on Earth. Made Britain one of the most powerful economies on Earth. Made the United States the most powerful economy on Earth. We need to go back to mercantilism, have tariffs on foreign imports, and we need to focus on increasing our economy, boosting it as much as possible, so that the cost of goods can go down and people can have a better quality of life. That's something that I would push for, no matter what, if I were to be elected into Parliament.